Heading into 2017, I really wasn't that big on the Arizona Cardinals. I just didn't get a good vibe from this team. And it is amazing how things can change so quickly and how the NFL can come at you really fast. Because this is an Arizona Cardinals team back just 2 short years ago that was playing in the NFC Championship game. Sure, they got throttled by the Panthers that night, but they still made it to the NFC Championship game. This was one of the more viable, relevant, competitive teams in the NFC for a couple of years stretch. But last year was a disappointment. And really, when I looked at this team heading into the season, I didn't see where things were going to be any different. They were going to be a relatively well-coached team that was undermanned in several spaces and just didn't have the right mix or chemistry to really make a run of it. And then when you go into the season, and week 1, David Johnson, your super stud all-everything running back, breaks his wrist and ends up being out for the rest of the season, it's not hard to figure out where things were headed. Sure, you can talk about after the first couple of weeks of the season making the trade for Adrian Peterson to try and bring somebody in for that backfield, but what was Adrian Peterson going to do consistently for this team, especially once Carson Palmer got hurt? Because as we know, this team is so criminally neglected addressing getting a young backup quarterback, heir apparent type behind Carson Palmer, and for the second year in a row, it's like their chickens really came home to roost on this, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. Ultimately, when you're in a spot where you lose David Johnson, you don't get that much consistently from a wide receiver not named Larry Fitzgerald, and then you're trying to win a bunch of games with Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert, you already know how this thing is playing out. But that said, the Cardinals were 3-4 heading into their bye, 4-4 at the midway point of the season, but that was where I thought they always were. That's a middle-of-the-road, mediocre, average football team. And that's the way it played out all year long. The first half of the season, they were 4-4. The second half of the season, they were 4-4. 8-8. It's the second straight season with no playoffs. And it's not that surprising to me with the result of what happened here in 2017, that Carson Palmer decided it was time to hang it up, and he was absolutely right about that. And that head coach Bruce Arians decided he wanted to step away from coaching. And frankly, it was a good time for him to do so. I had a feeling like all year long that this might very well be it for Arians in Arizona. And as the season continued to play out, I only thought that was more and more likely. So you can color me absolutely not surprised one bit when he did make that decision. And I think for all parties involved, it was the right time for Bruce Arians to leave. Because if he sat there and stayed in 2018 and this team had an even worse season, then people, the fan base, what have you, start to really call for him to be fired, and they'll start to hate him and not think about some of the good things that he did bring to the desert there in Arizona. So the timing was right for all parties involved for Bruce Arians, after 5 years, to step aside. But now you look at this Arizona Cardinals team, you've got David Johnson coming off of a wrist injury that he missed 15 games of the season for. You lost your starting quarterback in the past several years of Carson Palmer with no real viable young long-term replacement behind him. You lose your quality head coach in Bruce Arians. It could potentially get ugly in the desert very quickly. Very, very quickly. And even with Larry Fitzgerald technically under contract, it's going to be really interesting to see, based off of the decision made by the Cardinals, who they're going to hire, who they want to have in to be their next head coach, whether or not he's going to choose to even play again in 2018. I most certainly hope he does. Because watching a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, the professional that he is and the quality of player that he still is at this stage of his career, after 14 dang seasons, think about that. 14 dang seasons. I highly doubt Larry Fitzgerald is going to want to start over under a new system, under a new coach, somebody outside of the hierarchy of the team in 2018. I just can't see it. I can't. So there's a part of me that hopes the Arizona Cardinals ultimately hire somebody from within, for if no other reason, to keep Larry Fitzgerald on the field one more year. But we're going to find out who that next head coach is. And as of this recording, we don't know. And we haven't heard a lot of buzz. I haven't heard a lot of discussion or rumors about it, which makes me wonder if it is going to be somebody that's in-house or somebody that's way, way out in deep roving right field. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know who they would go with here. My thought would be if you finally, after so many stubborn years, choosing not to really address the quarterback position, and Logan Thomas most certainly does not count, that if you were going to bring in a young quarterback, you would bring in somebody that could work with him as a young offensive mind. But we shall see. But it's going to be a very interesting season for the Arizona Cardinals because things are going to look very different no matter what come 2018. You lost your quarterback in the past several years to retirement, your head coach to retirement, and you may potentially lose one of the greatest players in franchise history, the best player on your squad still to this day in Larry Fitzgerald, to retirement. A lot of big changes coming. And for this team, they have a little bit of salary cap space, about $28 million or so, but I don't see them being big-time spenders out there in the open market. They probably will focus more on trying to keep guys like David Johnson and maybe Dayon Buchanan long-term, as their contracts will expire after the 2018 season. I would think it's a top priority, even coming off of the wrist injury, to try and get a deal done with David Johnson. Maybe it's not. Maybe they let him ride out the string and use the franchise tag in next offseason, possibly. Or maybe you want to get it done. I don't know. But I can't see this team being massively aggressive in the open market because they just don't have a ton of resources. And I don't know how appealing they are going to be as a destination with questions at head coach, questions at the quarterback position. It's not a very appealing option. It really, really isn't. So it's going to be important for this team to do well in the NFL draft because that's a way, if you do it right, you can guarantee yourself that you're helping your team for the next several years to come. They've got picks in 6th and 7th rounds. I think they've got picks in rounds 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. They're picking 15th overall in the first round. And what do they need to do? Well, I think answer number one is unbelievably obvious. There is perhaps, outside of the Cleveland Browns, no more obvious number one need for a team than the Arizona Cardinals needing a young quarterback. They needed it the entirety of Bruce Arians' tenure in Arizona, and now that he's gone, they need it even more. And based off of where they're picking at 15, they'll be able to draft a guy if they so choose, but will he be the right guy? Will he be that dude? Remains to be seen. It'll be interesting to see with the Cardinals, knowing ultimately that if they don't get that young quarterback, it's not going to matter, and you can't realistically go into next season selling Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert, either one of them or a combination of them, as the face of your franchise, the future of your franchise, your best hope for 2018. You just can't do that with a straight face, can you? Can you? Can you? I would most certainly to God hope not. So, that means the Arizona Cardinals must get that quarterback no matter what. And perhaps they will be a team sitting there at 15. It would cost them a lot to do so, but maybe they will realize that if we've got our guy, whether it's a Rosen, Darnold, Mayfield, Allen, Jackson, I don't know who it is, but they might feel like they need to move up for him. Well, if they do, then they need to move up for him, because even if you give up a boatload of picks again, if he's your guy, then that's who you need. Nothing else is going to matter. Outside of that, it feels like it's a draft that primarily needs to be devoted to the offensive side of the football. While you could always use improvements and upgrades in different areas on defense, it feels like the focus really needs to be on the offensive side of the ball. Getting more playmakers, getting more balance, especially with a young quarterback potentially in mind. They really need help at the wide receiver position. You know, even if Larry Fitzgerald comes back for 2018, that might be all she wrote. And even if he doesn't, it obviously becomes the 1B need to the quarterback 1A need. They need somebody else because it's hard to count on John Brown to stay healthy. J.J. Nelson, how much can you really count on him consistently? After years of really ignoring the tight end position, they can't roll into 2018 with Jermaine Gresham as their best and only option at tight end. They just can't. You have a new coaching staff, new philosophy. It is time to bring in somebody at the tight end position, especially, again, if you get a young quarterback. And then they need an infusion of depth and talent, both outside and inside on their offensive line. Maybe you like DJ Humphries at left tackle, fine. But do you like Veld here at right tackle? Do you like anybody else really on that offensive line all that much? It could stand to be upgraded significantly. Again, when I look at this team, the vibe for me heading into 2017 wasn't very good. And it feels like the vibe heading into 2018, I know we're still a long ways away from all that playing out, is even worse.